doing sidewalk chalk. So basically the same directions apply, but if you want to, you can do whatever your concept is on the sidewalk for other people to look at. And if you do the sidewalk method, then just snap a picture of your thing, and that's what you'll upload to Blackboard. So does anybody got any questions there? I've never done the sidewalk chalk, so this is a bit of an experiment. First of all, does that sound interesting to anybody? Does anybody think about doing that? Okay, cool. All right, so you guys will be. Remember, you can work in groups up to three. If you do that, then each of you need to post your video or your picture of your sidewalk chalk up to Blackboard to your individual page so that you have posted the assignment there. All right, any questions? How do you do what? Post it? It's just, you'll go through, you'll pick the folder and upload material to it, and there'll just be a link. You can either, some people do a link, I just kind of leave it up to you guys on the video stuff as long as I can do it, as long as I can view it. And by default, if for some reason you're having a little trouble, I do need it to ultimately get up there, but then you can email it to me or whatever. But usually people can get it figured out. And so there's so many ways to do it, I don't even know how to really give directions on doing it. I just say do it. And you guys are pretty good about figuring it out. Okay, yeah. What's that? Attendance sheet. Thank you. All right, I like the shortening the room thing. So Connor, we'll let you be the back of the room. That's fine. But why don't we have you guys come up. Vinny, you on your gizmo there? All right. So off it was, or well, it was on it. Okay, well, we'll take a little bit of points away from you. So why don't we have you three come on up, find a spot, fill in the gap. I like having you guys a little bit closer. There's a couple really good spots right here. Look at that. That's a good solid table there. All right. So today we go to the other side of the island. Well, not really the other side of the island, but we need to look at a little more detail on the labor markets. If we go way back to the circular flow diagram that captured our two primary markets in kind of the free market. Again, we have the government in the middle on the kind of the next page up from this. But we've got households that are buying stuff from businesses, so they are the demand curve. And businesses are supplying goods to the businesses, they are the supply curve. Those roles get reversed down here. So that's an important thing to call to your attention right away, is down here in the resource market, the supply of labor is coming from the households. So the supply curve, when we get into the labor market, is the people, is the households. And the businesses are the ones buying labor hours, and so they are the demand for labor. So that's kind of the first thing to kind of kick us off in thinking about the labor market. Okay, so let's put that up for starters on getting our supply and demand brain on. So our home base looks a little different. The demand and supply are all the same. We're not reversing those sorts of roles. So we've got maybe dollars being measured here, but now we're going to be measuring the quantity of labor. We're looking at the resource market now. So this is thinking about the production process, the transformation of our buckets of scarce resources. Our big problem that society faces is we've got only so much land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. How do we transform that into the things we care about? The pizza, beer, chicken wings, shirts, basketballs, all those final products, right? So you guys have likely never thought about it this way, that as a society, we have choices on how we do that. So we can have one of the early lectures we did was we can have the dictator, the central planner, the benevolent person saying, you do this, I think you should be a doctor, and I want you to be a lawyer. and you go shovel ditches, right? And so that person could assign jobs to people to do. What we do in the United States is this free market business, and we let you do what you think is best for yourself, right? So you pursue your own self-interest, and Adam Smith claimed that the public interest gets served by you doing that because of all the things we've been talking about with competition and other things that keeps the market system in check. Now we're looking at the market for resources. The one we're going to really focus in on is labor, but this could be computers or machines or land or buildings. So there's other resources that we'll talk about too. The basic premise is the same in that now the demand curve is businesses. That is the business. They're the ones that want to buy labor. And so the dollars that we might be measuring here, instead of putting a P for the price of the chicken wings, we're going to have the wage, which is really the price of an hour of labor. And the supply of labor comes to us from households. What are some things that households are thinking about whether they want to go to work or not? Like, should they be a part of this? Should they join the labor force? What are some things going on in their world, i.e. your world, that might determine whether they want to supply some labor to the market? What's that?
Something that they want to do, it'll be beneficial to them.
Okay, definitely, yeah. We would have our kind of baseline assumption that we're not all here to serve the common good. All right? Some people have that worldview that maybe we should be that way. But what we found is that assumption doesn't work very well in economics. When we really study it in a scientific way, that just doesn't work very well. Okay, guys, we cut off the back of the room again. So you got Vinny's got some issues he's dealing with, so he's back there. But we got two wonderful seats up here. It looks like Jacob's got one left. Lydia's got one next to her. There's a couple here, Zach and AJ. So come on up. Last day of formal class. We already did the woo-hoo. All right. So, yes, they're pursuing their own self-interest. And so, in doing that, what are they thinking about?
Themselves. Health.
Come on up a little bit. What about in their lives, though? I'm just trying to drill down deeper than just themselves.
Well, I know that it's a factor that a lot of young families deal with. Is should both people work if you have young children?
Absolutely.
Because the cost of daycare may outweigh.
Right. Right. So you got the cost of daycare. So there's the financial spectrum. But don't forget, economists aren't all about money. And really, the art form of economics, part of what I think find it so intriguing, is the non-monetary aspects. Should I put my kid in daycare or not? What sort of non-monetary aspects are involved with that decision? Their education, if they get sick. Do we want somebody else, your own time? You know, do we want somebody else raising our kid, or should I do it, or will I do it better? Will they impose the values that I think I want my kid to have? You know, all kinds of interesting concepts come up with the daycare type issues. So yeah, households are thinking about, you know, family issues, right? Kind of non-market issues. What's that?
So does it come down to some kind of utility?
Absolutely, yeah. So that utility function, that happiness function that we have, has all kinds of crazy variables. Yes, it's got beer and pizza, but it's also got time with the kids or whatever, right? And what they did, their soccer, the ability for them to play soccer. I'm kind of into the soccer thing because my son's in soccer right now. So I went to the game. They won 2-1 last night, so yay. And they got a pretty good team this year. They only lost one game, and that was to the 6A Gardner School. So they otherwise were undefeated in their league and otherwise. So yeah, we got all kinds of stuff there. Well, economists are going to lump that into one category for simplicity, for starters. Again, remember this is an economic model. And they're going to lump it into this category called leisure. And so households, one of the constraints one of the constraints of households with labor decisions is time. We haven't talked that much about time constraints. How many hours in a day? 24. So that all of a sudden puts a constraint on this that's different than other choices we've looked at. So we've got 24 hours in the day, and we're going to divvy that up between labor and leisure. Labor and leisure. So economists look at this as the labor-leisure trade-off. If you want to play video games, watch TV, we can think about all of our leisure activities. Some of it might be spending time with the family, but we're just kind of breaking this into market work and non-market work. Every human being needs some element of sleep. You kind of learn that some people live on a couple, 3 hours of sleep if they're really wacky, and they probably got problems that are not easy to live with, but maybe they live on 3 hours of sleep. Well, that gives them 21 hours that they could be working or playing, right? So those are the things we look at with these labor supply decisions. All right, the labor supply curve has been estimated by some economists to look like this. Check out what I did. This is weird. It's called a backward bending supply curve. A backward bending supply curve. So here's the wage, W. Here's labor. And so the supply of labor we generally would think is upward sloping, and it is for the most part. But what would this backward bending business talk about? What is it capturing by thinking about the backward bending supply curve? What's that?
Qualifications.
Qualifications, what do you mean?
Like those higher paying jobs, you can't just give that to anybody on the street.
Okay, but I want to think about the person who had, let's hold qualifications constant. So let's look at a high paid position. Maybe we'll talk about a medical doctor or a lawyer or something. Why would the amount of labor that they're willing to supply go up and then eventually maybe even come back on itself? What's that? On salaries? We could think hourly.
They're only human, so they can't go for non-stop.
I mean, you're kind of on the right track thinking about the hours. So this is the first hour, second hour, the third hour, the fourth hour, the fifth hour, the sixth hour, the seventh hour, the eighth hour.
How many people would want to work there?
So you have to pay them more
Yeah, so
to work.
notice how I drew this too. I got this maybe going up, increasing at an increasing rate, right? If you're going to take away my 9th, 10th hour of the day, and I haven't spent any time with my family, how much value do I have on the first hour with my child? Is that value high or low? Really high. So we start thinking about the 10th hour of work versus the first hour with my kid. How's that valuation work? What this is saying is that you have to continue to pay me a higher and higher wage to offset my increasing opportunity costs. My opportunity costs of working more for you are going up because the time spent at home is a good also, right? And so we have to trade off. Now we didn't quite get to the backward bending part here. What happens at this turning point where we actually start reducing hours when we get up into these higher ranges? What's that saying?
Could that be because those higher ranges are in elevated positions where they have more people working below them?
Possibly, but I want to kind of still isolate it to the individual. The overtime, they're actually working less and making more though. So if we start thinking about the wage climbing to 20, 40, 60, 80, 90, 100, 120, $140 an hour now, $150 an hour. We're in a high income bracket, right? I mean, if people are starting pay, if you guys are making $20 an hour coming out of college with your degree, you're doing pretty good. So what's that saying about these people up here?
They have to work less, and they don't have to work as much to make as much money as.
Okay. What are they choosing to do at this higher level? More leisure. We still have the 24-hour constraint. And so at some point, the extra dollars don't mean as much for pay. You know, pay me $150 an hour, pay me $160 an hour. What becomes all of a sudden more important is this good. I want more leisure. And because of the 24-hour constraint, if I start to say, a vacation to the Bahamas sounds good, more time with my family sounds good, you know, other types of leisure, we might find that these people start to work less as the wage continues to climb. And so this is the type of evidence that we found in the labor market, is that that's people's behavior. In other words, we can't just continue to pay more and more to get more out of people. There's real constraints we face, and in fact, leisure starts to take over as the more desirable good at that point. Time. Because that's what it is, right? It's just time. You're not getting paid for it. You're actually getting paid less. Okay? Any other further comments or questions there? All right. Let me put this into a little more form. To kind of play with what you were talking about with the utility function. So now, remember when we did the consumer's problem of trying to maximize utility? The consumer problem now is to choose L star. Choose L star, which is the quantity of hours worked. When we did this in the utility chapter, how was income derived for a problem that you guys might have done?
We gave up to get.
Yeah, we just kind of gave it to you, right? So we said, suppose your income's $10. What are you going to do with your money? Suppose your income's $100. Kind of your salary approach, whoever mentioned salary, is that if you have this much money, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to spend the money? But now, that income is part of the choice system. So, given your skills, if you went to law school or med school, you might be in this dollar per hour range. And so you're going to choose the optimal amount of hours to work based on the market price for you. And then you're going to actually generate your I, depending on what you choose. You're going to generate your income. And then you're going to go, you could go through the same process of choosing beer and pizza and whatever else. But by thinking about L, you've also thought about leisure. So we're going to choose the quantity of hours work that maximize utility. The thing that's a little bit weird here is that you are choosing your income. Also, leisure equals 24 minus L star. If you choose to work 10 hours, you've got 14 hours of leisure. If you choose to work, so my point with that is that by choosing your amount of hours work, you're effectively choosing how much leisure you have too. So by choosing this, you're getting your answer of how much extra time you're going to have. Okay. So back to our basic model. Supply and demand here of this wage and this many hours worked. You may want to note that this is the labor market. I'm not talking about an individual, so this would have been maybe more specific to an individual, some of the concepts we were looking at there. But back to there being maybe a larger pool of people with a variety of skills. Sometimes thinking about unskilled labor might be a good one to look at. This is what we get. Now, what is this area? What was that area when we were measuring pizza down here? Producer surplus. Good. So we got kind of a similar concept going here, except we're in the labor market. And so what is that? Tell me what that's saying now in the labor context. So with the producer, it was the difference between what a producer was, the minimum amount they must get versus the actual price that they get. And it was kind of like profit, but it wasn't quite profit as we learned. But that was producer surplus. Now in the labor market, what's that saying?
Market surplus?
Yeah, it's a surplus of the same sort, similar sort. Who's getting it? Who's getting the surplus? The households, because it's based off the supply curve. They're getting paid a wage of $10 an hour. The hundredth worker was induced off the couch when wages finally came to $10. But there was other people out there that were willing to work for less. So the 80th worker is getting paid $10, but they would have been willing to work for $8. And so they are enjoying this surplus that we call economic rent. Economic rent. So this blue area in the labor market, same concept as producer surplus, but we're calling it economic rent. So economic rent is a payment to a resource that is above or greater, let's just put greater than its opportunity cost. So it's a surplus, a payment to a resource that is greater than its opportunity cost. So what's this area? What's that? Producers? No. So if this was one company, how much are we spending on labor? What's our labor cost for this company now if we're hiring 100 people? Who's got their little math calculator brain on here? How much are we spending? How much is the company spending? If this is the equilibrium, we have 100 workers. What's the total labor cost? $1,000, right? 100 times $10 is the area of the blue plus the orange is the total labor cost.
It's $1,000 per hour.
No, not necessarily. Well, it's $10 per hour for 100 hours of work. So I got 100 hours of work out of the people. If we're thinking it in people terms, then they were maybe putting in an 8-hour shift or something. We could go down a different thing. But I think it's easiest to think of the company's buying 100 hours of work at $10 per hour. 10 times 100 is $1,000. They spent $1,000. Now I wanted to think about it that way because now we're thinking about what was the people's paychecks. If we added up all their paychecks together, all 100 people, what was the total amount of their paychecks? $1,000, right? So the company spent $1,000, the people got $1,000, and now we're breaking it apart. And the blue area was economic rent, a payment to a resource that is greater than its opportunity cost. So what is the orange area? That's the opportunity cost, right? It's the payments made to the resource that were at its opportunity cost. I guess if that's good language or not, I'm not sure. But that is the people's opportunity cost. For each individual person, this person wouldn't have gone to work. The 80th person wouldn't have gone to work if they wouldn't have at least got $8. Why? Because they had $8 of other value doing something else. Possibly it was working a different job, by the way. That might be another option. Or spending time with their kid was worth $8 to them. They had to at least get $8 to get them to go into the labor market. All right, so that is that distinction there. That's a little bit of a twist from what we had. So let me give you a couple unique cases here. My black is running out. So what is, if we look at this supply curve or this supply curve, this supply curve perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic. So we got two different supply curves. And we could have any old demand curve, it really wouldn't matter. So we can just put in a demand and a demand. And we've got a wage in this one and a certain amount of hours being worked. And we've got a wage over here and a certain amount of hours being worked. Wage, labor, labor, wage. There we go. Which one's LeBron James? Which picture's LeBron James? As we think about this, right? So kind of think this way for a moment. We've got opportunity cost and we've got economic rent. And now we've got this to deal with, where we've got a wage. We got a wage. Which one is LeBron James? Is it graph A or B? B. Now, there's a couple different ways to think about that. Why do you say B? Why do you say B? Let's think through the logic here. So when you say B, that means, is that opportunity cost or economic rent? What is this area here, this little rectangle? Is it the orange pen or the blue pen? The blue?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody agree with that? All right, so one way to think about it, that is correct, is if we do a little golf club technology and we think about this. As I start to make this more inelastic, what's happening to the blue box? It's getting bigger. As I go this way, the orange box is getting bigger, right? So that's one way to kind of think about it from that standpoint. So here, the box is the line. Right? We got opportunity cost, and it gets big. So LeBron James is here because why? I'll just tell you that is correct, but I want to hear a good interpretation of why that would be all economic rent for LeBron James. How much does LeBron James make a year? What would you guess? Some of you basketball guys, what do you think? 21 million? That's what I was thinking. 21, 23. I think I've heard before. So 21 million. Let's use $21 million per year. $21 million. Okay? Why is that all opportunity cost? Or, I'm sorry, why is that all economic rent? What would be the justification of saying that that is economic rent for LeBron James? Okay, what tag? Yeah, in a sense. Yeah, so we could phrase that as what are his other opportunities? So what would LeBron James be doing if he wasn't playing basketball? Although he's pretty much a stud athlete, maybe he'd move into football or something. But what would LeBron do? Would he make $21 million? How much would he make? Man, he'd be down to ESPN commentator or something. I don't know. Maybe for a while his personality, and because he's still got the celebrity status, that would be okay for a while. He's a pretty decent speaker and he's got a decent mind. Maybe he could make $500,000 a year. I don't know what those guys are making, but a far cry from $21 million per year, right? So professional athletes tend to have a lot of economic rent associated with how much they're making. Who else has a lot of economic rent? Actors and actresses, right? What would they be doing if they weren't acting? Good question, right? So people that have would you call, and let me think of it this way, I talked about unskilled labor versus skilled labor. Is LeBron James a skilled laborer? Oh yeah. If you haven't watched him on the court, he's got some skills, right? Skills that most human beings don't have, right? So here we've got a highly skilled person, and they're able to command a very high pay as long as they can keep doing what they're doing for that particular niche. And that creates a lot of economic rent to that resource. Now, in some ways, you guys want to kind of do the same thing as you think about jobs you want to pursue. If you can kind of make your skills special at your business or what you contribute to the company, you're kind of doing the same thing, and you can start to command a higher pay, right? The fast food workers over here, right? They don't have a lot of other opportunities. So this is more of what we'd see in a picture with unskilled labor. Part of the reason to go to college. So maybe we're over here making $8 an hour, flipping some hamburgers over at the Mickey D's. What does it also say about McDonald's in terms of how many people they can hire at $8? As many as they need. They can keep hiring and hiring and hiring. So we can kind of think about the supply curve being, I've got 100 people, what if I need 120? I can go to the labor market and find more unskilled labor for $8 an hour. Whereas with an upward sloping supply curve, if I need to go to the labor market, I might have to start to bump up the pay if I start to find skills. So that's what this upward sloping supply curve is telling us, is that I might have to keep paying a little bit more money. Okay, questions or comments there? All right. So let's write down a little bit of this before I move on to the next thing. So total pay, so note, your total pay is equal to your opportunity cost plus economic rent, or it can be broken down into these things. Putting our equation goggles on, we've got that breakdown. So in your homework or test problems, you kind of might need to ride both sides of the fences, both sides of the fence, that the total income that was earned by the employee is, of course, what the business paid, the total amount paid. So the total pay, total compensation, this is employee income, but it's also can be thought of as employer cost, labor cost. So, what if we don't think $10 is enough to live on? And so there's legislation that says, I think the minimum wage should be $15 an hour. What is the impact on the labor market if we impose a minimum wage of $15 an hour?
This is a surplus of labor.
Okay, good. It causes a surplus of labor. And what's the different word that we put on that? So a surplus of labor could be thought of in the newspapers and in the media as increased unemployment. I just wanted to make that connection, that we've got a surplus of labor. So as we put in a price floor, which is what a minimum wage is, if we put minimum wage in here at $15, there's a bunch of people that would like to work, but businesses start cutting back on labor because it's more expensive, right? And so that leads to this surplus of labor, which is otherwise known as unemployment. And so that is one of the predicted effects that we have from imposing the minimum wage. Yes?
Will that cause a deadweight loss?
Yes, there would be a deadweight loss. So when we did if you look back to your notes from even when we just did the regular price floor, we calculated the deadweight loss. It ended up being like that area E or whatever.
That's what I thought.
Yep. So you're right. So that is a deadweight loss to society because there'd be other opportunities at a higher amount of labor. The short, one of the things we did back in that chapter was to think that the short side of the market wins, which is kind of just a thing to memorize, not really to put it into play, because both parties potentially lose here. But at $15 an hour, employers are only going to hire 80 workers, right? And so that's what causes the deadweight loss, is because this is allocatively efficient, where the marginal costs and marginal benefits of additional people being employed are equal. So we're losing out on opportunities to increase welfare, and that's the deadweight loss. Okay, good. Any other questions, comments? All right. So we need to think about the demand curve in a little bit more detail. So this kind of gives us a nice overview. And I want to start you off with a statement here. And let's just write it down and then we'll talk about it. Does this make sense? Question mark. A firm should hire another worker as long as the expected increase to revenue is greater than or equal to the expected increase to total cost of adding that worker. A firm should hire another worker as long as the expected increase to revenue, and we could put in the words total revenue if you want, the expected increase to total revenue is greater than or equal to the expected increase to total cost of adding that worker. It's a little bit wordy, probably not my best sentence in the world. A firm should hire another worker as long as the expected increase to total revenue is greater than or equal to the expected increase to total cost of adding that worker. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Why does it make sense? What equation could help us think about this a little bit better? Let's put on some equation goggles. What equation could help us? Kyler, what do you think? Kyler! 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 You! Hey, you! What do you think about that? What do you think about that?
I can't really understand like what you're saying. It's super like muffled and.
Is it because of the person that's in there that you're talking with, or?
No, I was telling him to stop messing with me because I'm trying to focus on this.
All right, well that's part of the advantages. You got headphones to put in because that usually makes it a lot better. Yeah, put in the headphones. All right, so what equation could we use for this? That would help us kind of see things. Hopefully, you guys are getting to that level. We're getting towards the end of the course. What equation might help support this concept if this was a short answer problem on your final exam? It doesn't even have to be a fancy equation. I'm looking for an easy one. That helps. And I got my extra credit marker out right now. What equation could you think about to help support that? As you were explaining something, you can maybe point to an equation. Oh, good. I'm looking for something simple. Good job, Jacob. That's worth an extra credit point. The profit equation. Just go back to the basics here. The profit equation is what? I'll press you a little harder since you're coming up with this brilliant idea. All right. So by thinking about the basic profit equation, total revenue minus total cost, check it out. A firm should hire another person as long as the expected increase to total revenue, maybe that's going to go up by, let's say, $14, is greater than or equal to the expected increase to total cost of adding that worker. Cost is going to go up too. But if that cost only went up by $6, should we hire the extra worker? Yes, right? It's profitable to do it. All right, so that's kind of our statement that I'd like you to hang your hat on in terms of marginal analysis. Should I hire another worker or should I not hire another worker? Well, if the marginal benefit of hiring another worker in terms of the revenue that they generate is greater than the cost of that extra worker, do it. If not, don't. All right, so that's kind of our backdrop to formalizing that a little bit more. By defining something called the value of marginal product, the VMP. So the value of marginal product, the VMP curve, the value of marginal product. So the value of marginal product is the change in total revenue from an additional unit of a resource. The change in total revenue from an additional unit of a resource. We've got a couple concepts going on. Recall marginal product. We're going to be looking at the value of the marginal product. What is the equation for marginal product? Who's got some equation goggles on for that? Marginal product. Change in total product divided by the change in quantity, labor. Yeah, so not quantity. Actually, this is the quantity, right? So that's the quantity of the output. So divided by the change in the unit of the resource. So if we added 10 workers or we added 2 machines or whatever, I'm going to use L as a generic word for the input or the resource. So just to make sure it's clear with Raj's point, because this is kind of helpful later, total product is quantity, the quantity of hamburgers, the quantity of whatever we're making. So that is also the way we can think about the change or the marginal product. All right. What law did we have with that? The law of diminishing marginal product. So what did that state? Okay, as we add more what? Quantity of output or resource? As we add more and more variable resources like the cook labor, when I had my grill, remember my grill top here, I'm in the hamburger business. As I add more and more of a variable resource to at least one fixed resource, capital, the size of the grill, the amount of product that each additional worker can make eventually falls or diminishes. So I'm just going to just kind of write this as a reminder, because this ends up coming in handy. The law of diminishing marginal product. I'm not going to put down the words. You guys have it in your notes from before. So we've got that kind of wrapped up with this concept. What is also now, let me do this in a different color, marginal revenue. Equation goggles. Marginal revenue is the change in total revenue. Now the quantity, right. So Roger's got it now, over the change in quantity. So this concept was saying, hey, if I make another hamburger, how much more money do I get? Right? What's the change in total revenue from an additional hamburger? Now we're almost there. We're going to put these two together to figure out the value of the marginal product. So the value of the marginal product, the VMP, the change in total revenue from an additional unit of a resource, turns out to be equal to the marginal product of labor times, oh wait, let me do that a little bit different here. I mean, we could do it that way, but the marginal revenue times the marginal product. Marginal revenue times the marginal product. Just plugging in these exact same equations you guys just did is kind of tells the story here. The change in total revenue over the change in quantity times the marginal product, which is the change in quantity over the change in labor. Now, while I know with certainty that we're not all real comfy with the interpretation of equations, I think if you look at this one, hopefully we've come to a point in this course where you can digest it and you say, okay, I kind of see this one. So as I work this equation, how can I simplify this expression? The change in Q's cancel. And so we don't have to totally obliterate them, but check it out. It tells this definition. The change in total revenue from an additional unit of labor. By putting those two together, we've got the value of the marginal product. Okay, so how does this tie into that demand curve then? Well, let's graph out what that would look like, the value of the marginal product curve. You can already see a potential, since we were talking about schedules with that other problem, right? We've got a column of marginal revenue, a column of marginal product, and your question's going to be, what is the value of the marginal product, right? Something like that might happen. And if we graph that out, what is that going to look like? The value of the marginal product curve, we're going to be measuring labor here and dollars up here. And we think about the first person, the second person, the third person, the fourth person, the fifth person, the sixth person, seventh person, the eighth person. What is happening to the value of each additional person's marginal product? Is it going up or down, or what's happening here? Might go up to a point and then down. What do you think? Upward sloping, downward sloping, or flat? You might not want to draw this, but does it look like this, this, or this? So A, B, or C? I've heard a couple downwards. Show of hands. A. B. C. Question mark. What planet am I on? All right, so let's kind of think through the logic for a second on whether it would be A or B. So as I increase labor, what's happening to marginal product? It's diminishing, law of diminishing marginal product. So I got that going down. As I have people making more hamburgers, what's happening to marginal revenue? As I have more hamburgers being made, so now I'm in Q space instead of L space. What did that marginal revenue curve look like? Demand curve, monopoly, what did the marginal revenue curve look like?
Oh.
Yeah, that was marginal cost was going up, but down. If we're looking at the marginal revenue curve with a monopoly facing a downward sloping demand curve, it was how much steeper than the demand? Twice the slope and lies below it. Marginal revenue curve looked like that. So as more hamburgers are being made, marginal revenue is falling. Now, in perfect competition, to push you here, the demand curve looked like that. What did the marginal revenue curve look like as we produce more corn? What did the marginal revenue curve look like in perfect competition? It's the same. Good. So it was equal to the market price. If we were selling corn for $4, then marginal revenue was constant. Now, the value of the marginal product curve is a combination of what two things? And as this is going up, what's happening to marginal product? It's going down, law of diminishing marginal product. As we produce more hamburgers, What's happening to marginal revenue? It's going down, or at worst, it's staying the same, but it's not going up. So it has to look like A. As we add more labor, the value of each person's contribution at the margin, remember this is each additional person, is going down. So the VMP curve looks like this, the value of the marginal product. So just for fun here, let's just pretend this is equal to, I don't know, $8. At 5, this is $10. At 4, this is $12. And let me do one more at 14. How much am I willing to pay the 6th person? $8. Why? I already have 5 other workers, and so what does $8 represent? Why am I willing to pay $8 to the 6th worker?
Because you pay them all the same you paid that first worker, you wouldn't have any money for your product.
Okay. So look at your definition. I want something very specific. This would probably be the way a multiple choice questioner might read. How much am I willing to pay for the 4th person? If I'm the business, I got my business hat on, what would I be willing to pay the 4th person? Why?
Because your
Total
total revenue is going to go down.
revenue is going to go down?
Well, it's not going to go down. It's going to go down like the total revenue per worker, the marginal revenue.
Okay.
Because the resources are better suited for
No, we don't want to go that direction. All I'm looking for, go back to does this make sense? Because that's why I write it that way, because quickly it doesn't make sense anymore because we get kind of confused with all these other things. Does this make sense? A firm should hire an additional worker if its total revenue increase exceeds the cost of that person. Now what I'm asking here is, what is the maximum amount I'm willing to pay the 4th person? How much? $12. Why?
Because that's when the total revenue will greater than the total cost.
No! You blew it at the end. I was so pumped up to have it. You were so close.
The total revenue will be greater than the cost of.
We're not bringing in the cost.
Okay.
So, how much am I willing to pay? What's the maximum amount I'm willing to pay the 4th worker? I think we're getting background noise. Oh, mute your microphone, Kyler.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. The maximum amount I'm willing to pay the 4th worker is how much? $12. Why? Why is that the maximum amount I'm willing to pay that worker? That's how much they're going to add to the total revenue. So that's why you had it, but then you went on to say that's because how much the total revenue exceeds the total cost. No, that's how much money they're making for me. So it represents the maximum I'm willing to pay. If I can pay them less, great. But that's the maximum willingness to pay. So that is a point of a wage, the maximum I'm willing to pay for the 4th person. What's the maximum I'm willing to pay for the 5th person? 10. What's the max for the 6th person? What is a relationship between the prices I'm willing to pay for various quantities? What kind of curve does that represent? The demand. You got it. Yes. The link is kept. The value of the marginal product curve is the demand curve. Because it shows the willingness to pay. It shows how much money each person's bringing into my company, and therefore reflects the maximum amount we're willing to pay. So that is the demand curve. So the VMP shows the maximum willingness to pay for each additional unit of labor, which makes it the demand for labor curve. It is the demand curve. The other little pieces of the puzzle we had is that demand curve is always downward sloping. That demand curve is always downward sloping because of two things. Really one thing, but so note, always downward sloping due to the law of diminishing marginal product. And marginal revenue being constant or downward sloping. So the law of diminishing marginal product is really the key factor there that makes that curve downward sloping. So oftentimes students are naive to that very simple concept, what we just did. You need to be generating value for your company that is at least as much as the wage. And you know when you're not doing that, right? When you're slacking off and you're playing time with your friends or whatever. Now, maybe you worked super hard and so you can have a little slack off time. But as long as the overall in the 8-hour shift that you put in, as long as you're contributing marginal revenue product, additional value to the company that exceeds your pay, you have job security. Because when it's firing time, who does the boss look for? When it's time to let go of a few people? The ones that have the lower value of marginal product. So are you person number 2 or person number 5, right? Whoever contributes the highest value to the company is the one that has more job security. So that all kind of works hand in hand with profit maximization. Okay, questions or comments there? Now I used the word expected in one of, I think that was in the does this make sense? And this is especially true when we start getting into capital or machines. I like the black. I got black refill. No. So VMP applies to all resources. So let me just kind of pose that with a question. Should I purchase a new set of computers for my sales staff? So I being the business owner or the manager of the corporation or the business. Should I purchase a new set of computers for the sales staff? What goes into that decision? Okay, how much revenue does the sales staff generate? We need to drill down a little bit deeper, but that's a good start, because should I purchase new computers?
Do the jobs that they're doing require them to use the computer as much as it costs?
Okay.
The change from the old computer to the new.
That's the one I was especially looking for. The change from the old computer to the new computer. Now, what is what am I thinking? What's going into the equation of whether I should upgrade them from the old computer to the new computer as the business person?
How much do computers go?
Possibly that would be one thing.
How much
So,
time will it save?
how much time will it save? Yeah, how much more productive will my sales staff be with the new computer? What is the marginal productivity of an incremental increase in computing capability, right? So how much more productive will my sales staff be? Now, what else goes into that equation? That's one part.
How much will it cost to train someone on computers?
That'll come later. But I want to think about my maximum willingness to pay for a computer. So how much more productive will my people be? You guys got that part.
You look at revenue.
You got to look at revenue, right? So the marginal revenue, how much more money will that extra productivity generate me? Those two things aren't necessarily one and the same. So if I give a new computer and they can be X amount more productive, but I'm only making an extra buck this year on it, and the computer system's going to run me 2,000 years, you can see that despite it being a more productive move, the dollars associated with that extra productivity might not be high. That brings in the marginal revenue part of the equation. So we got the marginal revenue and the marginal product. All are the important ingredients into the value of the marginal product. So should I purchase a new set of computers for my sales staff, I want to think about the marginal product. The marginal product of the new computer relative to the old. That's the important part, is not just the fact that we're getting new computers, but the new compared to the old. How dysfunctional was, how much is that holding productivity back? So that's one part. And then finally, how much can we sell the extra product for that these computers helped make? If we think hard about those two pieces, we'll eventually come up with our maximum willingness to pay for the computer. If that number is $6,000, after thinking about it kind of hard, not easy to add up and perfectly calculate, so we're doing a little bit of gut feeling if we're in a real business setting, right? We might not even have any fancy equations we're doing. We're just kind of got the back of a napkin and when we're out on a lunch or something. But we're thinking about these components, and then we learn that the new computers only cost, now we get back to the cost. The cost of the new computer is $2,000, but then there's training costs. I got to train my people. I'm going to spend a little bit more on that, and it's $2,200, but the maximum I'm willing to pay is $6,000 or whatever. Should I buy them? Yes. The value of the marginal product exceeds the marginal resource cost, the additional cost of that resource, which isn't on this graph yet. This simply shows the maximum willingness to pay. So if I can hire as many people as I want at $10, if the marginal resource cost curve is flat, you can hire as many people as you want at $10. How many people should I hire? 5, right? Now we're back to the does this make sense? Hire until the cost of an additional person is just equal to the value that that person brings to my company. All right, so that ends up being our optimal decision here. All right. Actually, before I do the cost thing, I wanted to bring up one other thing here with the computer. Do we capture all the benefits of the computer this year? Do I capture all the benefits of the labor this year? Now be careful with that. In other words, if I buy another unit of labor, I'm at a restaurant, and I buy another hour of labor, Does the restaurant capture the benefits, the value of that labor that day or that week?
Yes, because they work that hour.
They work that hour, that's right. Yeah, so I saw some heads shaking a little bit. So the value of their marginal product, that extra hour, they're going to flip this many more hamburgers, and we're going to sell that many more hamburgers. Maybe we throw the hamburgers in the freezer is why I extended it to a week or the next day or something. Maybe we're prepping some food. But the point is that within a certain short time frame, the company's going to capture the value that that person brought to the table. Is that true with the computer? Is the company going to capture the value of the new computer that day, that week, that year?
No, because you have to see how productivity increases over time.
Over time. So does the computer last more than a year?
Yes.
Yes. Will there be benefits from the computer 2 years from now? Yes, right? So now we've got benefits, value, streaming in over time. That makes it a little more difficult, doesn't it, for the problem to think about the value to my company over time. Now, I'm not going to get too hung up on this, but if I have money coming in this year, $500, and money coming in next year, $500, which $500 is more valuable to me as a business person?
Right now.
Than now. The sooner the better, right? That's the time value of money. And the appropriate way to handle that is to discount some of that future money coming in by taking the present value of it. So I want to make that note because you need to kind of see that with machine decisions. It's kind of obvious if I go buy a building and we need a building to hold education in, this building might last 30 years. Well, we need to think about that in terms of our choice process. So let me just make that kind of under this. I know you guys stopped here. I'm trying to stay in front of you guys here. So note, for capital purchases especially, so that resource of capital, for capital purchases, the business will likely enjoy VMP over many years. And future dollars are not worth as much as present dollars. So the last little bit I want to leave on this topic is just to kind of make sure we're on the same page. If we think on a timeline of here's today, here's now, and I buy a computer and I expect the computer to last 5 years, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've determined that that computer is going to bring in an extra $500 each year. That is the value that I think that computer will bring in, is $500 for the next 5 years. The value of the marginal product is not equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times 500 equals 2,500. The value of the marginal product of the computer is not equal to the simple sum of that money, because $500 5 years from now isn't nearly as precious as $500 this year. And so what you need to do is you need to find the present value of the future $500 payments or $500 VMPs. And I'll just leave you with the VMP doing it the right way. The present value of the VMP is going to be something less than $2,500. We're not going to spend the time in this course to go through the actual calculations, but I want you guys to be thinking about that, especially those of you who are business majors, which is a large fraction of you. This is something you're going to see in other courses as we go on, is thinking about the time value of money. Super important concept, especially in finance and just long-term decision making. Okay. So we need to put in that marginal resource cost business. But I wanted to get that concept out first. Let me ask any questions, clarifications? Yeah. Present value. I should have put that down here. So if you want to put PV after present value, need to find the present value. PV is present value. Good. Any other clarifications? Comments? Questions? All right. So, two cases for marginal resource cost, MRC. Marginal resource cost. So you remember the price taker, price maker business? Does that ring a bell? Who is the price taker? The farmer or the electricity company? The farmer was, right? So we said that they were a price taker. Why?
They have to take the price of the
Yeah, whatever the market cranked out is what they had to take. So if the market was a combination of thousands of farmers, thousands of consumers, and if the market price was $4, that's what they had to take. So we've got now a couple cases that are similar to that, is why I wanted to bring that up with the marginal resource cost curve. So we have case number one is a resource price taker. So what this means is that there's a competition in the resource market. So competition in the resource market causes the MRC to be equal to the wage, or the price of the resource. So for our company, we can kind of think of what we did with perfect competition. Maybe this is the demand for unskilled labor. And we are a fast food restaurant or something. We'll ignore minimum wage issues, but let's just say the interaction of workers who are unskilled, remember they're the supply curve, the demand curve is the fast food restaurants. The interaction of those two come out with a wage of $8. Our company over here, being a resource price taker, if this is actually now McDonald's, a particular company, or maybe it's Pizza Village, would be a better thing to do. Think more locally. If they want to hire 3 people, what do they have to pay per person? $8. If they want 6 people, if they want 9, if they want 10, $8, $8, $8. The marginal resource cost curve is perfectly elastic. And so McDonald's is a resource price taker. Now, we've already covered the value of the marginal product curve. You can just put any old VMP curve in here, which is the demand. The marginal resource cost curve is the supply. So the supply of workers is perfectly elastic. The firm maximizes profits by hiring L star. The amount of labor where the value of the last person hired in terms of the revenue that they generated is equal to the cost of that person. Good old marginal analysis. The economic way of thinking. Okay, questions there? That's kind of what we've teed up so far. Now you got it down in your notes. Good? Resource price maker. So a monopoly was a situation where there was a single what? Single firm, a single seller. We're going to look at a monopsony, another new word. A monopsony is a single buyer of resources. So case number 2 here is a resource price maker. Also is the case of what we call a monopsony. A monopsony is a single buyer in the market. So this type of story would go like this. Suppose we're out in rural Kansas somewhere, and there's a hospital, and there's not another hospital for 100, 200 miles, right? So we got this hospital out in rural Kansas. That hospital is the only purchaser of nurses, right? Or they're one of the singles, so they have some buying power with the nurses. And so if that's the case, when we think about the market again, they face the whole supply of nurses. Similar to our monopoly story, facing the whole demand curve, but now that hospital faces the full supply curve. All right, so the firm faces the market supply curve. And so now, draw another picture, nice and big here, with an upward sloping supply curve. If the company can pick up 3 nurses at $20 an hour, that's 1 point to the market. If they need 4 nurses, what must they do? They need to raise the pay, right? The only way to induce the 4th nurse to come to work for the hospital, they have to raise the pay. Now, if they raise the pay for that nurse, what about the other nurses? They have to raise it for them too. So very similar story to what we saw with the single price monopoly, is that the 4th nurse I had to pay $30 to, but what was the real marginal cost associated with the 4th nurse? 60. How'd you get that? 10 for the previous ones, right? So if we think about the marginal cost with the orange marker here, the fourth nurse, I paid $30, but I also had to bump up the previous 3 nurses $10. So this orange area reflects the marginal resource cost. The cost of an additional nurse is not going to run me the $30, but it's going to run me $60, something higher. And so the marginal resource cost curve, so I put this right above here, this orange dot represents the marginal resource cost. The cost of an additional nurse is not the 30 I had to pay him or her, but the 60 because I had to pay 30 to get him or her, and my previous employees I had to bump up too. And so the marginal resource cost curve is upward sloping and lies above the supply curve. They're not one and the same. Questions on that? Okay, let me write that out. So, note, firm not only has to pay $30 to get the fourth nurse, but must also raise the previous 3 from $20 to $30, which gave us a marginal resource cost of the fourth nurse equal to 60. All right. Questions so far? We've got another little layer of detail to go. We don't have the value of the marginal product in here. So I'm going to strategically write it, just to keep some numbers flowing, right here. The value of the marginal product curve, which is the demand curve, remember. This is the value that each additional nurse brings to the hospital. How many nurses is the hospital going to hire? Four. Supply equals demand. Everybody on that? Joe, did I see a head shaking? I hope it is, because you're right. Why 3? Equals the demand, which is the value of the marginal product, right? So does this make sense? A hospital should hire an additional nurse if the value of that additional nurse is at least as much as the cost of that additional nurse. Under these circumstances, that additional nurse is not the wage of 30, but the overall effect to the cost because of having to bump the other ones. So we're going to hire 3 nurses. What are we going to pay them?
Whatever we paid the last one.
Whatever we paid the last one. Now I had to What do you mean? What was the last one? Give me a number. What are we going to pay the 3 nurses? $30. Everybody agree with that? Lydia, what do you think? 20, right. Why should I pay them more than they're willing to work for, right? The supply curve tells me that I can hire 3 nurses at $20 each, right? $20 an hour for each nurse. So, under a monopsony, the optimal quantity of labor, L star, is 3, where marginal resource cost equals value marginal product. And we're not going to pay them their value, which sounds evil, doesn't it? Look at this. Check this out. The 3rd nurse brought in, what do we got here? $45 worth of jack to the hospital, right? So the 3rd nurse brought in $45, but I'm only going to pay him or her 20 because that's what they're willing to do. That doesn't sound so bad when I spin it that way, does it? So there's the wage for the monopsony. The firm has some buying power because they're the only show in town. And so this is kind of similar to the monopoly argument that we're not at the allocatively efficient solution, right? What are we lacking? Why do we not have the allocatively efficient solution? What are we lacking? We're lacking multiple buyers. Competition in the buying of nurses. So it's again due to a lack of competition that we get a result like this. And that little triangle would be called what?
Deadweight loss.
Good. We got things cooking now. It's good. This is the final class. We got the deadweight loss going. Got all kinds of fun stuff. All right. So let me write that down. Let's add this onto our notes. So we want to hire L star. This is, by the way, the abbreviated version of the does this make sense? Hire L star where the value of the last person hired in terms of revenue is equal to the cost of that last person to the company. Hire that amount of people pay W star to get 3 L star equal to 3 workers according to the supply curve, which is just putting into words what we did with that picture. And that gives us a wage of 20. All right. Take note of your watches. I am letting you out early on the last day. All right.